I missed you guys last week. Shockley didn't. He was very adamant about saying, I don't miss them. I'm glad I'm here. Shockley and I were in California, and so we were not able to be with you guys last week. But I tell you, to get all the text messages and hear about all the things that were going on and all that kind of stuff, because I was asking for updates constantly, just wanting to know how it all went. I even called JD, and he didn't answer. He's like, well, I was praying. I was like, I was trying to interrupt. That was the plan. But he maintained discipline and didn't answer my call. But it was just super cool to hear everything on the way home. And so the whole heartbeat behind the experiment is simply to have an exercise in living generously. And that's something that we kind of will oftentimes will have these little nudges where we feel like maybe we should go talk to somebody. And then when we get out into the parking lot, we're just kicking ourselves because we didn't act on that nudge. And I think a lot of times the Holy Spirit is telling us to take action in certain circumstances that are unfolding all around us. And then we miss those opportunities because we get so busy doing other stuff. And so it's so much more than the act of service. It's so much more than the offering that we give, because it's reflective of the condition of our heart. So that's the whole heartbeat behind the experiment. And so when we serve, we're giving our energy, we're giving our time, but when we bring an offering, we're bringing our resources, right? And so I don't know, I thought it was awesome. It was beautiful. And to find out that night, almost $1,500 was invested into other people through not random acts of kindness, but very intentional acts of kindness. And you honestly have no idea what God can and will do through that. And it's funny because when Floyd County Jail called the church, I was like, uh-oh, Kelsey got another speeding ticket. And I'm like, oh, no. But no, they were calling to say thank you. They were calling to say thank you for taking coffee and donuts. So to a bunch of officers, which that can get you in trouble. But I just think, for me, it does my heart good to know that I'm a part of something where people will give up things in order to bless someone. And so thank you guys for being faithful in that, and continue to be thoughtful of what we can learn about how God can take these things and create movements in our life instead of just something we do in the fall and something we do in the spring, okay? So if you forgot who I am, my name is Ben, and tonight we're going to be talking about our heart. We're going to be talking about the condition of our heart. Next week, we're going to be jumping into a new series called Live Your Mission, and we'll kind of be doing that alongside the rest of Northside, but we'll kind of be broke up a little bit because Turkey Fest is actually not this Friday. It is coming up in a few weeks. It's on a Wednesday night in here, and so that night will kind of be a little bit different because we obviously won't be teaching. We're going to be sharing Thanksgiving together. We're going to have a big meal, and you're going to bake something, or you're going to bring something, and it's going to taste good, even if you have to go buy it, okay? Right? Yeah, you're like, yeah, maybe. Don't be that guy, okay? Don't be that guy. No. So if you remember, during our Freeway series, we spent a lot of time talking about our heart. We spent a lot of time walking through a whole process of kind of digging in and exploring and truly discovering what's even going on in here, like the mess that is bundled up in here. And we got to see over the course of those weeks some pretty cool stories unfold. Some of them we didn't get to hear all up front, but if you're paying attention in your groups, you got to see some stuff. I know for me, it was stuff that God had already been working on my heart with, but to be able to be vulnerable in my group, to have safe space, to talk about some things that are going on in here, is just good. And so I know as we kind of dig in tonight, some of this stuff, hopefully it sounds kind of familiar. Hopefully it's stuff that you're like, yeah, we've been talking about that, because we spent some time asking ourselves that question, how's your heart? Because if we can't hone in on how our heart is, we're going to maybe miss some of the other things going on in our lives. And we spent some time talking about, like, when we recognize something that's broken, do we want to be healed? Do we want God to bring healing in our lives? And so we've already seen some of that unfold. I've gotten quite a few text messages. I've had good conversations, and I've gotten a lot of Facebook messages from both people in this room and in this space, but even people are fellow return folks that are somewhere else on different campuses to see what God's doing in them as they've been doing this alongside us. And so I just think that's awesome. But tonight what we're going to do is take a look at a verse that we have probably heard a gazillion times, and you've probably heard it preached a gazillion times, but it's pretty difficult to apply. It's a tough one to apply. And so when I say the word heart, what comes to mind? What do you think of when I say the word heart? What? Blood? Love. I thought you said blood. Love? That's good, right? Love. Blood, okay? What else? What comes to mind? The Lion from Wizard of Oz. Okay? Yeah. Mortal Kombat. Finish him. Right. What else? Yeah, I was going to say, that's what I was thinking. Wasn't the Lion the courage guy? Yeah. He was at a Rolling Stones concert. So what? Yeah. Yes. What else? What comes to mind when I say the word heart? Guard your heart. What you said something. The shape of a heart. Okay. I think of sophomore year of high school, biology 2, dissecting a sheep's heart. Yes. Awesome. I also, I think about, Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. And I don't know what the guy was actually saying, but do you guys know, do you remember that? You don't know. You probably don't remember that movie, but maybe your parents were wise enough to expose you to it at some point, right? When the guy just straight through the guy's chest, pulls out his heart, and it's like, ka-choom, ka-choom, ka-choom. And he says something, and I don't know what it was, but you know what it sounds like? Oh, eat your heart out. Oh, eat your heart out. That's what I always thought. As a little kid, I was like, that's what he's saying, as he's holding this pulsating heart. So now you're like, heart, right? What do you think of when you think of heart? Pirates of the Caribbean? Oh, I thought you were going to reference a crush on somebody, but yes. You have the hots for Johnny Depp. That's great. You might think about music. Harry Styles. Yes. Taylor Swift. Yes, she's got that thing she does, right? What? Like what else? I know, Calla, my little girl is constantly, this is my heartbeat song, and I'm gonna play. And I'm like, yeah, you don't need to know the rest of the lyrics. I'm a Kelly Clarkson fan, but I don't need my 6-year-old singing that song. But think about like when people say like you're wearing your heart on your sleeve, right? Phrases like that. Heart comes to mind all the time. And what's funny is like we're both talking about like the actual organ, right? Oh, eat your heart out. Oh, eat your heart out. Right? Whenever you do that, I'm hoping that you're going to go home and you're like, I need to watch some Indiana Jones. Take Jake with you. Like when I think about it, I mean, all of those things come to mind. But when you think about a heart in the physical sense, it's an organ. It pumps blood through your veins. It's what keeps you alive. I mean, you can be brain dead, and if your heart's still beating, you're considered alive. When your heart stops beating, you're not considered alive anymore. You're like, yeah, we went to school, right? But do you see what I'm saying? Like, this thing is important. It's a big deal. It's necessary, okay? But biblically speaking, this is the innermost part of something. This is not just the seat of your emotions. This is the essence of you. Biblically speaking, it's where your identity is found. When we think about like who I am, it has everything to do, biblically, talking about your heart, your innermost being, the center of you, the essence of you, this mind, body, soul. That's what it's talking about biblically when we talk about heart. And basically, it's something that we should take care of, right? So why is it hard to take care of our hearts? You're like Benjamin, like dieting and exercise? What are you talking about? We live in a world that's opposed to what we believe. Yeah. Like what else? What makes it hard to protect and take care of this thing? Anybody? You're like, Katie's answer was pretty good. We trust too much. Yeah, it's hard to like protect your heart when we're constantly like letting other people hold it, right? We like take it and then they, what do? They rip it out of our chest, they throw it on the ground and dance Macarena all over it, right? I mean, isn't that what happens? I mean, who's had their heart broken? Anybody? Can be honest about it? Who's lying right now? Right? Yeah. I read your tweets, right? Like, right? I mean, we've all had our hearts broken. We've all had our hearts either beat up or bruised, right? And when we're hurt, we don't know what to do with it. But it's because when it's an attack on our heart, it's an attack on us. We don't see it as just a part of us. We see it as us, the center of us. And I think the reason why I think it's so hard to protect our heart is because we just oftentimes don't know who it belongs to. And if we don't know who it belongs to, we'll hand it out to everybody. And they won't offer the same level of care that it needs to be healthy, to be strong, and to survive. We need to know who this thing belongs to. And when there's heart problems, they show up in different ways. I mean, we'll have all these symptoms of things that we'll try and diagnose, things that we're like, oh man, this, that, whatever. And the reality is there's always something deeper going on. And we'll maybe miss what the deeper problem is. We'll go to try and fix this and fix that because we're trying to resolve all these symptoms instead of dealing with the heart of the matter. No pun intended. Like we'll miss the main point because we'll try and work on all the other little details. Well, we're going to take a look at Proverbs tonight. And then Solomon's writing a bunch of words of wisdom. That's what Proverbs is all about. It's not just these little nuggets of truth, but it's pretty cohesive. And so there's a bunch throughout this where he is talking specifically about our heart. But in chapter 4, we're going to dive in here, and I'm going to read a few verses. I'm going to be reading from the New Living, but I'm going to kind of bounce all over the place with NIV message and stuff like that. But in Proverbs 4, verse 20, in a few verses, okay? It says, "Pay attention, my child, to what I say. Listen carefully. Don't lose sight of my words. Let them penetrate deep within your heart. For they bring life and radiant health to anyone who discovers their meaning. And the one that we all know, above all else, guard your heart, for it affects everything you do. Above all else, guard your heart, because it's the wellspring of life. That's what the NIV would say. Above all else, guard your heart, because it sets the course for your life. The Message says that it's where life starts. Above all else, guard your heart. And it even says vigilantly, right? It carries that tone, to guard it with vigilance, to be vigilant in the way you watch, in the way you care for this thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this and see what God can teach us about why we guard our heart and how to guard our heart, and how to just apply this verse actually in our lives instead of it just being something we hear all the time, and maybe spend some time living that, okay? So the first thing, let's just break it up into some phrases, all right? Above all else. When I think of above all else, what it does is it brings attention to utmost importance, right? When something is, it's pretty straightforward, right? When something is above all else, well, it's actually above everything else, right? So when anything's on the top shelf, normally it's because it's more valuable, right? Because you have little kids with grubby little hands, they take things and they break stuff, right? Nobody familiar with that? I remember when we were reconditioning our house, everywhere, like before we sold it and moved down here, like everything 3 feet and under had so much stuff all over the bottom because they got all these little fingers everywhere, right? When things are valuable, they're above. But above all else, it carries this tone of, is referring to everything else that Solomon is talking about. That's why he's saying this needs to penetrate deep within your heart. It takes me to Deuteronomy 6:4 when Moses is saying the words like, literally, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." And he goes on to talk about like how it's literally, impress this upon your heart, etch this upon your heart. It needs to stay there. It needs to stay there on your heart. But if we don't let it penetrate our hearts, it won't stay there. So when we think of above all else, You have to think of it in terms of it is the top priority. Whatever comes next after the phrase above all else should be your top priority. So just think for a second here about your routines, about your rhythms that you do every day. And if you need to close your eyes and go to that magical place, whatever. But think about your routines and your rhythms and ask yourself, what is my top priority every day? Like when I think about the things I do every day, what dictates my choices? What dictates my actions, my thoughts? What consumes my thoughts? Like what holds sway in my life? Like what is that thing about every day that seems to be above all else in my life? Because for some of us, maybe it's just getting through the day. Maybe it's school, or it's work, or it's a relationship, all those things that we all experience, right? But I'm not asking you to answer it, but I am going to say this. Write it down. Because maybe it's on the tip, maybe it's in your head right now already. Maybe you need time to think about it. But if you ask yourself, what do you focus the majority of your energy, your effort towards? Above all else, from day to day, what is that? What seems to be the center of your thoughts, your feelings, your actions? Because if you write it down, and let me be clear, I'm not looking for you to write down the Sunday school answer. What I'm saying is don't write down what ought to be. Write down what actually is. Because we can all give the Sunday school answer of what ought to be above all else. Write down what actually is. Because what we're going to try and do is wrestle with some of that. The second phrase is guard your heart. Guard your heart. Guard the essence of you. Guard the center of you. Guard the identity of you. Guard the center, the mind, body, soul, everything that is you. Guard that. And that word, it carries a lot of extra meaning. Like when we think of guarding, sometimes, well, I know we're not a sports crowd, so none of you, you're not going to be thinking, yeah, I'll just skip that, right? I remember a few weeks ago when I was like talking about being a starter, and everybody's like, what does that mean? It's like, it means you get a start. It means you get to play before everybody else does, right? But when we think about guarding things, we can't just think of something that like, oh, you put up a defense and it'd be something simple. No, to guard our heart, it means to keep a close eye on. It means to watch over in order to protect or control, in order to defend when necessary. You know what that means? That means that if you're building a fort, right, to protect something, it means that there's something attacking it. You don't build forts when you're not under pressure from something else. So when we talk about guarding our heart, it actually carries a military concept along with it. Think in terms of vigilance. Think in terms of urgency and attentiveness. This isn't passive. This is active. It's not just defensive. It's offensive. It's to shield and to defend. And so again, think about those rhythms and those routines that you do every day and the ones that hold sway over everything else, the top priority. What do you do to guard that? How far will you go to guard that? Whatever that is. Like whatever it is, what extent are you willing to go to defend it and protect it? Whether it's your social life or your secret life or your church life or your school life, all these little different compartmentalized categories of life that we try and keep from touching, because as soon as they touch, right? See, when things that are above all else that shouldn't be become the things that we guard, we don't have the right defenses in the right places. And the attacks are still coming. So we've got to ask ourselves, what are the things that we are guarding? I know for me, I'm a dad. And you guys hear me talk about this all the time. I'm also a husband, and I'm a husband before I'm a dad. And the best gift that I could ever give my children is to love their mom, my wife. Because the best gift that I could ever give you as a pastor is to love them first. Because if I'm not the husband I'm to be, I can't be the dad that I'm to be. And if I can't be those things, I'm useless to you. And so, yeah, I work hard to guard that, to protect that. That's why sometimes it takes me a while to reply to text messages. That's why sometimes it takes a little while for my schedule to work out, because sometimes I run out of time, because sometimes there are things that have to come first. That's what this passage is getting at. That's what this verse is saying. There are things, just by saying above all else, it means that there are else, and there's things that come first. And that's why the phrase, guard your heart, carries such a strong tone, because it means there are things coming at it. And we don't live in a neutral world. Things are coming at our hearts all the time. We live in a world, like Katie said, we live in a world that is constantly opposed to us. We're not living in Athens anymore, where it's just competing ideas. We're living in Babylon. This is hostile territory for our hearts. And the third phrase, so above all else, guard your heart. And the third phrase is, for it's the wellspring of life. It's the wellspring of life. It affects everything that you do. Because when it's the wellspring of life, it means it has everything to do with how you choose to live. The wellspring, it's the source, it's the original, the beginning of whatever is coming forth. And it paints this picture of literally an inexhaustible source, like a spring, right? Like you're like, man, where'd that come from, right? It's coming from the ground. Well, we only see that it's coming from the ground, but we don't know how deep it is. It's coming from somewhere below the surface, right? Or a well. What happens when wells dry up? Nobody goes there to get water, right? This isn't a trick. I'm not trying to trick anybody. What happens when rivers dry up? Everything else around it dies. No one, nothing goes to it for nourishment. Everything around it dries up and dies. So if this thing is the wellspring of how we live life, if this is the source in which everything else follows, right? Then it makes sense that we are to guard it, and it makes sense that we are to guard it first. And if it's polluted, well, then everything that comes from it is contaminated. Everything then becomes polluted. If the wellspring, if the well, you don't drink that water, right? You don't eat the fruit from the trees around that. It still bears fruit. There's a lot of meaning in that. We all bear fruit. It just doesn't all taste good, right? It has everything to do with the kind of dirt we're in. So when we say, above all else, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life, it helps us see that everything flows from it. Everything. So again, think of your rhythms, think of your routines. Ask yourself this: what is flowing from your wellspring? That river that comes from you. What's flowing from it? Is it healthy? Is it contaminated? Have there been some spills that you're trying to clean up? But somehow you just don't get all of it. There's just residual stuff everywhere in corners of your life, right? Messes go everywhere. And we'll have this tendency to think when we make messes of our lives, oh, if I just change the way I do this, or if I change the way I do that, or if I change my behavior, we go into modification mode, trying to change the way we do things instead of dealing with the deeper issue of what is going on in our heart. We have to move upstream. We've got to move upstream because it has to do with the condition of our heart. That's why when we're in a sin pattern and we're making choices that are truly destructive to our lives and to everyone else around us, that's why it's not as simple as just stopping doing that. I mean, when you have people that are like, man, I've talked with people that are like, man, I want to work with college kids because, college kids do dumb stuff like I did. And I've had people tell me, they're like, I just want to tell them to just stop doing that. And I'm like, man, that doesn't help anybody. Because you know what? If we just stop doing things, we're dealing with everything downstream instead of going to where things start. it can't just be stop doing something. It has to be start doing something. That's what repentance is. When there's a sin pattern in our lives and we call it what it is and acknowledge it to be wrong, not sorry that we got caught, sorry that it's wrong, we turn from it and we move in a distinct direction away from it, not just out of fear, but towards someone. I mean, that's what Christ calls us to. That's why this isn't about behavior modification. If it becomes about behavior modification, then we miss the goodness of grace. Don't miss the goodness of grace. Guard your heart above all else. And if we keep pushing things downstream and just hope that it's going to work out, we find that it doesn't. We have to go to the source. Above all else, guard your heart. Why? Because it's the wellspring of life. That's why we've got to acknowledge that our hearts are pretty jacked up. I mean, isn't that what the whole Freeway series was about? Was kind of identifying the things that hold our hearts hostage and then allowing God to set us free from those things. Well, that does not mean that we won't be the ones that run back to that vomit and start eating it. It does not mean that we will not run back to the things that have held us hostage and said, here, enslave me once again, because they're still coming after your heart. That's why it's not just stop doing something and staying put. It is about movement towards Him. Jeremiah says that our hearts are deceitful above all things, that our hearts are liars. And that's why when somebody says, follow your heart, they're an idiot, okay? That's why when somebody says, follow your heart, that's called bad counsel, okay? Or when they say, you'll know it in your heart when you're ready. No. That's not good advice. That's not good counsel, because your heart will lie to you. I mean, how many of you have ever thought, man, I thought I really liked that person, or I loved them, right? Our hearts, they're bundled up messes so much of the time. This isn't about following our heart like that song, listen to your heart. Oh my goodness. What a mess. I'm not singing to you guys tonight. That's when you say, thanks, Ben, right? Yeah, there you go. We've got to guard this thing closely. Because like we've said before, whoever or whatever sits here owns you. Whoever or whatever sits here in this throne room of you is your king. So it makes us ask, who is the king of our heart? So if we want to guard this thing, we need to strategize, or as W would say, add some strategery. Because here's the deal. Things are going to try and put up base camp right here. And again, if you aren't fortifying defenses, proactively thinking of how to guard this thing, all of the things that are coming after it, we'll find a way. I mean, think about it. We strategize to guard everything else. We guard our behavior, right? There's certain ways you don't act in public, right? Right? Because you want people to like you, right? You don't fart in front of your girlfriend, do you? You shouldn't, right? Number one, it's gross. Austin's like, we're just skip this, right? No, we modify our behavior. We guard our behavior. Why? Because we don't want to lose our job, or we don't want to lose our friends, because we want people to like us. We strategize these things. What happens is we spend more time protecting our image instead of protecting our hearts. And that gets us all turned around pretty quickly. And so like we shared this weekend, this idea of how do we develop some strategies. And we're just going to throw some of these out here. And the first is this: look for indicators. Look for things that are indicators. In Matthew 15, Jesus he's talking, and the Pharisees are upset because of what he's doing, because the guys have just been eating some stuff and they're not happy about it. And so they come to him, and so Jesus says this, okay, in chapter 15, verse 17 through 20. I'll read this real quick. Anything you eat passes through the stomach and then goes out of your body. Agreed? Yes. Right. Okay. But evil comes from an evil heart, and defile the person who says them. For from the heart, come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all other sexual immorality, theft, lying, and slander. These are what defile you. Eating with unwashed hands could never defile you and make you unacceptable to God. See, they're missing the point. They're focused on ceremonial cleaning. They want to wash your hands, which again, washing your hands before you eat is a good idea. But they were missing the point because they were thinking it made them unclean. And the reality is, this is something that you hear all of the time. But the things you say and the things you do, they're indicators of the condition of your heart, how you choose to live. That's why when Jesus rattles off all of these things, these are conditions of people's heart. You've heard it a million times, and you've probably heard a million sermons on it, or preachers say it over and over again, but what is in you is going to come out of you. What's in you will always come out of you, one way or another. And we know that God's the one who changes hearts. We know that God's the one who heals hearts. He's the one who takes what's broken and puts it back together. And what we do is, we have a tendency to ignore all the gauges on our dashboard that tell us, you should pull off to the side of the road and let things cool down. We'll ignore the warning signs. We'll ignore the indicators that we're walking down a road that ends in destruction. And so we've got to ask ourselves, are there warning lights in our life right now that we just think we're supposed to keep driving, that they'll just clear up on their own? Because they won't. Ezekiel 36:26 says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. This idea that we've got to hang on to is that God is the one who brings a new heart. God is the one who breathes new life, that we are new creations when we are in him, right? He has every intention of making you new. That's why he wants to rule here. Jesus comes in to rule our hearts because he's the only one who knows how to make it new. He's always going after your heart. And so this weekend, again, we shared some things that damage our heart. Because if we're looking for indicators, we're actually digging deeper to find the damage. Those things that damage us. And that was sin and hurt. And these are things that often compound one another because our sin creates hurt. But so does everybody else's. I mean, our sin will hurt ourselves. It'll hurt other people. But you know what? We live in a world where we get to deal with everybody else's mess too. And we've got to be able to discern and distinguish the two. If we're going to guard and guard well, we've got to first look for the indicators, but second, identify what damages sin and hurt. And thirdly, we've got to address accordingly. We've got to respond differently to each of those things. And the first being with sin, it's confession. And man, that gets tough, right? Because we don't like to be vulnerable. It's easy to be transparent. It's not easy to be vulnerable. When we're complaining, we're transparent. There's a big difference, actually. But it's confession. It's acknowledging before God our sin. And that's tough because we live in a world where we're told that that isn't real. Because everybody's truth is supposed to be equal, which philosophically makes no sense. But we're told that. We live in a world that believes that. And if we aren't honest with God, if we can't find ourselves in a place where we are repentant before God, we will never be able to deal with our sin appropriately. And so the first step is to confess, to own it, like we talked about in the freeway series. But the second thing is to do this. Find a trusted friend, somebody who's going to choose to be in the trenches with you. Somebody who's not going to take your secrets and tweet them out, right? Somebody who is willing to be in your corner, that is for you. You'll hear me talk about this all the time, about accountability. And we get accountability and judgment confused because there's a relationship that has to happen. Accountability isn't just, hey, you tell me your dirt, I'll tell you my dirt. No, accountability is saying, I'm giving you permission to hold me accountable to the things that I'm struggling with. And your job is to call me out on it. But your job is not just to call me out on it and bust my chops when I'm out of line. Your job is to be in my corner, to be for me, to be praying over me and encouraging me and saying, hey, I'm in this trench with you. That's accountability. That is accountability. We can't kid ourselves that as long as we just share with somebody, all the dumb things that we've done, that doesn't do any good. All it does is it breeds room for us to just be like, well, I know what you do, so you can't hold me accountable. And we get all turned around in that. It's a completely different thing to hold someone accountable because it's safe space. Someone that's going to pray for you and love you and walk alongside you in it. So the question is, who are you accountable to? Do you have anybody in your life that asks you tough questions, that you've given them permission to say, hey, how are you doing with this? Whatever this is. Like, do you have that person in your life? And if not, why not? Because if above all else, guard your heart, because it's the wellspring of life, that means this is not something easy to guard. We've got to be able to confess to God. We've got to be able to find a trusted friend and be able to come alongside one another and be in this trench together. The second one, with hurt, it's knowing and naming the emotion. Emotions are tricky, right? They're tricky, they're complicated. Sometimes we don't even know what we feel. Sometimes when we're texting, we don't even know how to put it into words, so we just use those little things, emojis and emoticons, or whatever else we're going to call them next, right? And everybody gets so excited when they see the next batch that comes in of all these faces that you really don't know what they mean, right? You know? And I'm starting to use them just to be annoying. Like Shockley he'll hit me with something in the office and I'll just vomit a bunch of these things. None of them make sense. None of them. Because I'm redefining emojiing. That's my plan, you know? But we get confused with emotions because we don't know how to wrestle with our feelings. Emotions, they represent the state of our feelings, so where we're at, what we're wrestling with, what we're thinking and feeling about ourselves. It gets weird because we don't know what all this stuff means. Are we happy? Are we sad? Are we angry? Are we scared? Like all these different things. Can people tell how you feel? If you remember this summer, we talked about emotional health a lot and how much it holds hands with spiritual health. That like if we're an emotional train wreck, that means likely we're a spiritual train wreck. That it highlights, it reflects an immaturity in our hearts when we miss that. But what happens is, so many times, because there's so many different emotions, we just kind of bundle them all together instead of process what's going on here. I mean, anybody ever been angry? Right? Matt's like, definitely, right? But we also know, when we think about anger, we also know that that's not, we've heard it in textbooks over and over again, it's a secondary emotion, right? It's not what comes first. There's always, even if you're quick-tempered, there's still a different emotion driving that anger. Well, if we can't name those things, we can't deal with who's hurt us. We can't deal, and some of us, we're hurt with somebody, but that person we're hurt with is sometimes ourselves. Sometimes we're just disappointed in ourselves. And we've got to be able to name these things and deal with it, because if we don't, we won't know what we're supposed to hang on to and what we're supposed to let go of. This weekend, when Shane was talking, he just referenced this. He said, when we bury them, they grow stronger. But when we expose them, they lose power. It's the same way with sin. When it is brought out into the light, it no longer has power over you. Secrets keep us sick. That's what sin does. Hurt can do the same thing. Above all else, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. So, you've heard me say this before, but how's your heart? I'll beat that drum over and over again, because it is the wellspring of life. Who you choose to be, what you choose to say, what you choose to do, all of these things come from what or who is king here. So how's your heart? Are there people that you're angry with? Are there people that have hurt you, that you're hanging on to? Are there sin patterns that need to be brought out into the light? Not here, not now, but with a trusted friend, because you've set them before God. And what does God do when we do that? He forgives. He's faithful. How's your heart? Do you have someone to keep watch with you? Do you have someone in your life willing to be in that trench with you, to bust your chops when you're out of line, but be in your corner when you're on your A game? No matter what, they're in the trench with you. My encouragement, my challenge, think on that, pray on that, wrestle with that, and find somebody that you trust and allow them the permission to ask you tough questions, because they will need to do the same for you, and I'm telling you, you will be blessed by it. Let me pray, we're going to get into the groups.